aliens. Whether you think they're cute waifus from other galaxies, meddling archetypes from 2006, or little green man from outer space. It's a topic that leaves no one indifferent. Anime about aliens are not nearly as popular as those using more traditional magic systems, as they usually involve a much greater deal of world building, since you have to start explaining the biology of creatures that don't exist to understand why they glow in the dark, while fire-breathing dragons are just, well, magical. For that reason, once we read the synopsis of Brynhildr in the Darkness, the concept drew us in immediately, although there was also another very important detail, that being the author of this work, Lee Nakamoto, mostly known for the Elfen Lied franchise. Therefore, expectations were very high for a good part of the anime community, who were attracted by either the author or the concept of the series. Were these expectations met? Why isn't Gokukoku no Brynhildr as popular as its predecessor? Why weren't there any guards in the factory? Let's find out.
Gokukoku no Brynhildr, or Brynhildr in the Darks in English, was a manga series that was published between January 2012 and March 2016. It ran for 181 chapters compiled into 8 volumes. The reception for the manga is mostly lukewarm, with the most common sentiment being that the series had potential and that it's very similar to Elfen Lied. Even with its lukewarm reception, an anime adaptation was announced, airing from April 2014 to June of the same year. This adaptation was in charge of Studio Arms, who has also worked on Elfen Lied and Higurashi no Aesthetica, a video that you should watch. And if you're wondering about their capabilities as a studio, well...
I arrived at the series with moderate expectations, as the synopsis, although bizarre, seemed like an interesting concept, especially since we wanted to take a break from watching another ecchi show.
I do not wish to be horny anymore.
The first few episodes were a bit of a struggle to get through as the pacing was very slow and the comedy in between the heavier parts wasn't hitting the mark. It seemed like a serious and dark story with some lighthearted moments though, and it might just take a bit for it to get going, so we kept watching. Then the real issues began. The rhythm of the story went from slow to messy around episode 3, where a lot of the seriousness of the story went away to make space for ecchi? God damn it. Yeah, it turns out there's like a lot of fan service here. I'm not against ecchi on serious shows, as it, much like comedy, can give a much needed breather between all the despair and heaviness of it all, but when half the runtime is poop jokes and shining nudity, it was overall a disappointing experience, as the concept had promised, but the rhythm along with other narrative issues kept dragging it down.
As someone who watched Elfen Lied and also watched Brynhildr during its original airing period, my expectations were higher than my wellness. Sadly, my expectations weren't met really. While the anime shared a few similarities with Elfen Lied, sure, after all, both being mangas from the same author, it was bound to happen, the concept itself is very different, with sci-fi and mystery being its more prominent features. At first glance at least. Once you watch the show, and just like Mokey Naga said, the anime, while it had a slow startup, setting a heavy and depressing tone for what's to come, it ends up being an ecchi slice of life that every now and then adds some shock value or forced development to impress the viewer. While the comedy sections work after episode 3 or so, it got in the way of its original premise. You expect aliens, secret societies, characters struggling to survive and uncovering mysteries that surpass human comprehension, but then you have a rom-com-like story with lots and lots of fan service. We'll talk more about these issues in due time, but for now I can say that it is a disappointing experience more than anything else. I didn't watch Brynhildr in the Darkness to watch aliens showing tits. For that we already have to love Ru.
All I can say is that I had no expectations or anything, since I'm not a big fan of the genre.
I expect nothing, and I'm still let down.
I tried to watch it with a fresh mind, expecting some alien stuff, or some mystery, or I don't know, something new, but in the end, it was all over the place. It's yet another piece of content full of ecchi and some comedy. If you ever watch any of our previous videos, you know that it always comes back to ecchi, no matter what. Anyways, even though this was supposed to be a serious sci-fi mystery, the comedy wasn't bad by any means. But it was poorly implemented, and there was a lot more than it needed to be. I think all the serious topics lacked impact because of this. Aliens? All I saw were a few slime-like things with sharp teeth appearing a few times and with no real explanation. Sure, at the end they kind of say that aliens created humans or something, but that's about it. Witches? More like lab rats with implanted slimes that give them powers. A harsh reality for the Mindcast, mystery, secret societies, the Spanish fucking Inquisition. Nah bruh. It's all about the set jokes and the fan service. The anime had the wrong tags all along.
The visuals, while nothing stellar, are quite competent for what it is. The art style of the anime is very similar to its source material, with cute characters facing traumatizing experiences. It's not as violent as Elfen Lied, but kept the dark atmosphere that characterized it, kind of. There aren't many scenes of graphical violence, and when it happens in the form of melting witches, it's way less gory and it's also censored. Maybe way too much. This is not because we want to see gore in anime, but the bright flashes on screen were annoying to watch sometimes. Animation-wise, it's mostly decent. Action scenes were done properly, with simple yet creative ideas, and movement was fluid enough. There weren't many distracting frames, but there were a few issues in proportions. The clearest example being this chair, that changes size around 5 times in less than 5 minutes. Ironically, the animators struggled to animate the bedridden character.
While the sound aspect isn't stellar by any means, the sound effect delivered didn't disappoint either. There are many familiar faces in the voice cast, where a favorite delivers being Susaki Aya's Kana, with her sass levels off the charts, and Ichimichi Mao as Kasumi, as her Kansai dialect was pleasant to hear. The aspects that are defined solely by the visuals and audio are the opening and ending sequences, of which the former deserve its own discussion. The opening one, yes, this show has more than one opening, don't ask why. While it has some questionable musical choices, the visuals are very striking, setting a dark tone for the upcoming story, with images that evoke the feeling of a world that isn't compatible with the witches, while also portraying the looming danger the girls are in. Their lives have an expiration date. Sadly, the opening only represents the concept of the series and not the series itself, but we will be covering that as the video progresses. Opening 2, used for like 4 episodes or something, mainly reenacts the scenes from the previous episode. It shows the main characters while alluding to their powers, and that's it. While some people enjoy the guttural vocals, screaming, and faster rhythm compared to the first one, it still is a questionable choice regardless. Not because we don't like the genre, but when the singer is screaming while a character is licking a fucking ice cream or lying on a table, it's a bit weird, just saying. Not to mention that this opening also fails to represent the tone of the series, so both openings are as misleading as they come.
If we didn't talk much about the technical aspects of the show, it's because the core set of issues in Brynhildr in the Darkness lies somewhere else. Most of the problems in the franchise can be found in the narrative department as a whole, which is an issue, because the narrative is literally the most important part in a mystery or a sci-fi story. This series is both of them. Strap in because it's going to be one hell of a ride. Story. The story starts with Ryota Murakami, a young man with a clear desire to prove the existence of alien life, in honor to his late friend Kuroneko, a young girl who ended up dead in order to save him when they were just children. 10 years after this accident, a girl named Neko Kuroha arrives at his school, bearing a striking resemblance to his dead friend. Ryota tries to learn more about her to find any connection between them, only to find himself caught in a conflict between aliens, the government, and witches. That's the gist of the plot of Brynhildr in the Darkness. Although a bit convoluted at first glance, the concept is very interesting, keyword being concept.
While we understand that serious stories like this tend to start off very slow, as there's a lot to unpack before any action or character drama starts, Fate Zero, a story with a similar tone that I really enjoy, starts off very sluggish, only picking up after a few episodes. This slow start can be understood, but you expect it to be followed by a coherent narrative that makes the wait worth it, something that Gokukoku no Brynhildr struggles with. The story starts by exploring the tragic backstory of our protagonists, showing what drives them and what's at stake, as the witches are quite literally living on borrowed time. If they spend more than 30 hours without taking a death suppressant, they liquefy like the witch at the end of The Wizard of Oz. Although the humor during this segment wasn't quite on the spot, it still was a promising start for a series.
What follows is the start of constant tone shifts for the story. After finishing our first battle sequence, where our protagonist survives by the power of the writer's room, we start seeing more slice of life scenes mixed in, sometimes without any transition whatsoever, which, okay, they want a normal life, it's understandable. Why the tits though? Well, jokes aside. Alongside the normal life scenes just mentioned, a lot of ecchi scenes start to creep in. Like once it could be a fun distraction, sure, twice we could say it's okay, but when every episode starts having comedic nudity in some way, it starts to clash very heavily with the tone of the series as a whole. Being blood is a core trait in one of our characters, sure, but having a main cast of 5 people, we shouldn't base the majority of the runtime on hair humor. The only quote-unquote necessary ecchi scene is when the protagonist gets to look at Neko's chest, as one of the defining features of his childhood friend was a set of 3 moles near her armpit, that apparently shifted to one of her breasts, I guess.
While the humor does work sometimes and we appreciate that it's there, the sheer volume of it is the problem. For a series that is marketed as a sci-fi drama with a big mystery behind, these aspects end up taking a backseat a lot of the time. Plot points and character progression are left in the air or feel stagnant because of so much screen time being dedicated to literally flashing breasts. When the best way to define your show is tonal whiplash, maybe you should take a look at what's being shown on the screen. Maybe take away some of the ecchi for, story.
Another issue with the story of the franchise is the lack of proper world building. We are supposed to believe that the main cast is fighting against a secret organization, with the power and resources to splice humans with alien creatures to give them superpowers, yet they're unable to hire a minimum wage night guard to power the factory that produces medicine vital to their experiments. The same organization that sends a high-ranking officer on a field mission to keep tabs on a memory-altering telepath equipped with a gun and sunglasses. This organization is also capable of coercing the fucking police, hiding their operations in plain sight, yet they are unable to find 5 high schoolers that take the same road to school every single day. One of them can't even walk. I mean, if you have 3 to 4 students who appear out of nowhere in some isolated school that suddenly start hanging out together in the same club and going to the same building every day after class, coincidentally not going home afterwards, you would think that maybe, just maybe, something suspicious is going on there. There's more issues in this department, but this list has been going on for long enough. It's very hard to take a sci-fi or mystery show seriously when the main reason your protagonists are surviving is due to the sheer negligence of the opposing evil force.
この大失態の責任は一体どう取るつもりだ。見たか、あの大爆発。もはや穏便に事態を収拾することは不可能だ。
多少の失敗には目をつぶっていたが、まさかここまで無能だったとは。
今この場でお前が自決しても責任は免れ得ない。
沙汰は追って下す。君には期待していたのだが、残念だ。
We could overlook 1 or 2 blood conveniences, but when they start to pile up, it certainly shows.
The main cast is interesting enough, and their dynamics work for the most part, but their development is painful to watch. Most of the characters follow this flowchart. The characters introduced, we are shown their tragic backstory, and they either join the main cast or they die within the episode. That's the formula the author landed on in order to evoke the necessary emotions in the spectator, which could be fine if it wasn't the only road he took. These sequences of events just end up feeling too fabricated and struggle to make you feel anything after the first or the second one. The only exception to this would be Kazumi, the only character with lots of screen time and development aside from Neko. But for the others, it just feels lazy. The worst offender of the bunch will be Nanami, a character that had a very compelling introductory episode, just to be killed in the next one. And that's not the worst part, because she erases her existence from her friend's memories and stores part of her consciousness in the protagonist's memory, making the previous episode completely pointless, because the main cast got nothing from this experience. At best, you can say that the protagonist got a stand for himself.
Characters are an important aspect in every mystery story, as they are the vehicle that take us throughout the plot. We only know as much as our main characters, and their interactions help us bring the truth to light. When it comes to Brynhildr, while there's a decent variety in the cast in terms of abilities and personalities, they end up being either underdeveloped because of the rush plot, or underperforming in their assumed roles. The first example will be Tachibana, who, although unable to move like the rest of the cast, delivers a large amount of sass throughout her text-to-speech. During the first half of the series, that is, since she starts speaking less and less as the show progresses, for no discernible reason. Also, she falls in love with the protagonist somewhere down the line for, sample text, whatever.
A second example would be Kotori, the one with the ballistics.
I see that the president's equipped his daughter with ballistics too.
Initially presented as a possible threat to the party, she ends up joining them after her tragic backstory is revealed, then disappears from relevancy, only being used for the mandatory fan service moments until the very last arc, where she becomes a planetary level threat in like 5 minutes. Even worse, the situation is defused in the next 5 minutes, and even worser, the main antagonist didn't even try to stop her despite her being like 5 meters away. Then we get an exposition dump explaining that she was some sort of clone or forced reincarnation. It's not very clear, and she dies anyways, so there is no hope for further development either. Also, she falls in love with the protagonist somewhere down the line, for reasons, of course.
Finally, we have Wakabayashi, the get out of jail free card in the cast. You'll see why in a second. She is introduced near the end of the show for what we assume our replacement for Kotori, because she's going to die, as a means to cheat death, because, spoiler alert, the main cast can and will receive fatal injuries, or to make the protagonist look even cooler by helping her even when it was needed, just to prove a point. Thanks to the aforementioned point, she ends up saving the party by kinda dying, just because hours earlier she kissed her protagonist and fell in love with him for wait a minute. To sum up, the supporting cast is mostly used for making the protagonist look better than he really is. Unfortunately, this comes at the detriment of the development of the secondary characters, as they end up feeling like a means to an end, rather than people with real goals.
Talking about the protagonist, Murakami might be one of the biggest issues in the production. This dude might be the nicest guy in the entire solar system, helping the witches even to his own detriment because... and that's the issue. Aside from helping Kuroha because of his survivor's guilt, he has no driving force behind his streak of selfless actions. He's just that nice. Near the end of the show, he's already friends with them, so it's understandable, only by that point. But he has risked his life for them like twice by that point. He has no reason to repeatedly put himself in harm's way beside a superhuman desire to be nice.
This is even worse when we consider that the protagonist already is a Mary Sue. The guy has like 300 IQ, with photographic memory, he is instantly liked by every female he encounters, he can keep his cool no matter what, and can design complex strategies in the middle of life or death situations. We also learn that he's apparently the nephew of an important scientist, right when the party needs to make some special medicine. What a cool guy. Also, the way his uncle drinks coffee makes me want to die.
But he has his flaws, of course, such as being unable to recognize any romantic advances from the female cast, just like 90% of anime protagonists. God damn it. Not to mention the plot armor he has is thicker than Kotori's thighs. Among the cool feats we have, he's saved by Neko at the beginning of the series from a situation he chose to be in after he was warned repeatedly. He cheats death by stabbing a witch through her heart, forcing her to turn back time. Memorizes the serial number of the pills that keep the witches alive a mere 5 minutes before they burn, just because. He has the right connections to replicate the pills with the help of his freaky uncle, who's also smart as fuck. He's apparently immune to memory manipulation because his photographic memory. By the way, this point is never fully explained. It was probably left vague on purpose since it doesn't come up again. His memory is so good that he can store an entire separate consciousness that can also communicate with him, but only when the writer wills it. He cheats death once again with his waifu-shaped revive pistol, and his unremarkable actions had such a strong impact on the female cast to the point that the witches cannot live without him, going as far as knocking him out to stop him from getting involved. In the worst case scenario, the waifus go as far as throwing away their lives so the protagonist can stay alive.
While quote-unquote nice protagonists are nothing new and are not necessarily bad, the problem starts when your main character is a nice person and is extremely smart and every girl starts loving him at first sight and so on and so forth. We don't see character growth or any meaningful interactions between the protagonist and the other members of the cast. While supporting characters are interesting as we mentioned before, the story is centered around Murakami and how good he is, leaving little room for anything else to develop.
After watching Brynhildr in the Darkness, we can't shake off this feeling of disappointment. Despite having a promising concept with a dark tone and mystery as selling points, you end up getting an ecchi comedy yet again that kills one of the girls every now and then just for good measure. While parallels between this show and Elfen Lied can be made, the set of issues that is Brynhildr in the Darkness makes this comparison a surface level criticism in the grand scheme of things, aka the show sucks by its own merits. Raw story, uninteresting protagonist, unnecessary levels of fanservice, and liquefying a recently introduced character only to go to the beach in the next sequence makes me wonder what was even the point of this show. We know that thriller stories can be hard to pull off, but if you're a bit lax in this department, Gokukoku no Brynhildr can be a half-decent experience. Otherwise, eject yourself from this show and keep looking.